He mopped the hallway like always. Head down, slow steps, quiet hands, and they laughed, called him Gramps, said he was wasting space. One of the interns even filmed him sweeping up coffee grounds and added music. Everyone chuckled. Until the colonel arrived. He was just supposed to give a quick briefing and leave. In and out, but when he passed the janitor near the break room, he stopped cold, stared, then stepped forward and said one word, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. What was that word? Before we reveal it, press the subscribe button and drop a comment below with where you're watching from. Now let's get into it. Every morning, long before the office lights flickered on, he was there. Same routine, same faded green jumpsuit, same cart with a front wheel that squeaked once every 3 rotations. Most people didn't even know his name. The ID badge clipped to his chest was so scuffed you couldn't read it anymore, but the building's access system didn't need it anyway. He was grandfathered in, part of the infrastructure. The younger staff called him Radar because of how silently he moved, and because he always seemed to appear exactly when someone was talking about him. But he never said a word. He swept floors. With surgical precision, replaced air filters before they needed replacing, and tightened doorknobs before anyone noticed they were loose. Always alone, always efficient, always gone before the morning rush. The building was a medium-security federal contractor office, handling logistics and communication support. Mostly junior analysts and civilian techs who'd never seen combat. To them, he was just the maintenance ghost with Windex. Think he actually sleeps in that janitor closet. Someone had joked near the elevator banks one Tuesday morning, loud enough that the comment bounced off the marble walls. Probably lives here, another voice added, followed by laughter. Dude's got that whole building comes alive. At night horror movie vibe going. Even Evan Martinez, a new analyst, had chuckled along. But Evan was also the only one who started actually watching. He noticed the mirror-polished boots, how the man never fumbled for keys, never carried a list, but somehow never forgot anything. He always paused exactly 5 seconds at the freight. Elevator. Every time, most telling. Evan had never seen him looking for anything. That's not janitor behavior, that's military training. Still, people laughed. That's what happens in places where nobody bothers asking the older guys questions, where youth and speed get mistaken for intelligence, and experience gets dismissed as outdated thinking. By Thursday, flyers went up for the monthly Excellence Recognition Ceremony, mandatory morale event, with awkward speeches and laminated certificates. So that Friday morning, as bagels and coffee were set out, he was there, standing in the back, hands clasped behind him, not eating, not making small talk, just observing. Nobody acknowledged him. Nobody said thank you for keeping their workplace spotless. He wasn't expected to participate, just to exist quietly in the background like always. Amy Caldwell, the mid-level administrative coordinator who'd been running these ceremonies for 4 years, was warming up the crowd with her usual repertoire of workplace humor. Jokes about the temperamental air conditioning, the copy machine that jammed if you looked at it wrong, the water cooler that dispensed liquid that was technically water but tasted like it had been filtered through old gym socks. Then her eyes landed on the maintenance man, standing motionless in the back corner. She grinned that particular grin people get when they think they've found an easy target for audience participation. And of course, she said, her voice carrying across the room with practiced projection, we have to give a round of applause to our building's guardian angel. Seriously, I think this guy's actually part of the infrastructure at this point. Has anyone ever seen him sit down? Anyone? Polite chuckles rippled through the crowd. A few heads turned to glance back at him. Amy was just getting started. We've all been calling him Radar because he's always just there, like you'll be talking about a broken thermostat and boom! She snapped her fingers. He materializes out of thin air with a screwdriver. It's honestly kind of spooky. More laughter, louder this time. Someone near the front made a joke about checking for hidden cameras. Even Evan found himself smiling, though something about the whole thing felt wrong. The man hadn't done anything to deserve being made into a punchline. The maintenance worker didn't react, didn't shift position, didn't change expression, didn't acknowledge the attention in any way. He just stood there, still as a monument, watching Amy with those steady grey eyes. Someone near the projector cart knocked over their coffee cup, sending liquid spreading toward a power strip. Without a sound, without any visible hurry, the maintenance man was there with a towel, cleaning it up with quick, efficient movements. The whole incident was handled in less than 15 seconds. Amy leaned back into the microphone, really enjoying herself now. See what I mean? Still no expression. I swear, someone should check this guy for a serial number. We're talking full robot mode here, people. The laughter was getting meaner now, the kind that comes when a group decides someone is fair game. The maintenance worker finished cleaning, checked that the power strip was dry, and quietly walked back toward the supply closet. Nobody followed. Nobody wondered if maybe he had somewhere else to be or something else to do. He'd served his purpose as comic relief. But 10 minutes later, the side door opened again. Not the supply closet door. Not the maintenance corridor. The main conference room entrance that led from the executive wing. Colonel Daniel Briggs walked in like he owned every square inch of the building, which, in terms of security clearance and operational authority, he basically did. Tall, broad-shouldered, late 50s, with the kind of bearing that made junior officers stand up straighter without being told. His dress uniform was so crisp it looked like it had been pressed with a steam iron 5 minutes ago, and the silver eagles on his collar caught the fluorescent light like small spotlights. He wasn't supposed to be there. This was a routine administrative meeting, the kind of low-level morale event that colonels usually avoided like contaminated water. Amy's voice caught in her throat, mid-sentence. The room went quiet, not awkward quiet, but the kind of silence that happens when everyone suddenly realizes they might be in over their heads. Evan noticed it first. The colonel wasn't scanning the room or looking for whoever was in charge. His eyes had locked onto the maintenance worker like a targeting system acquiring a specific coordinate, a beat of absolute silence. Then Colonel Briggs spoke, his voice cutting through the quiet with the clarity of a blade. Ghost Viper 1. Is that really you? For exactly 3 seconds, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then someone near the back let out a nervous laugh, sharp and involuntary, like they'd misheard something. Ghost Viper 1. What kind of call sign was that? It sounded like something from a video game or a bad action movie, but Colonel Briggs wasn't smiling. His face was stone serious, focused entirely on the man in the maintenance uniform, and the maintenance worker wasn't laughing either. He straightened slowly, methodically wiped his hands on the shop rag he always carried, and turned to face the colonel with the kind of calm precision that spoke of decades of muscle memory. He didn't look confused, didn't look startled, didn't look like a janitor who'd been mistaken for someone else. He looked like a soldier who'd been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Colonel Briggs took one step forward, his voice dropping to something that was almost reverent. "Sir, it's really you." The maintenance worker gave a single, barely perceptible nod. Not a smile, not a salute, not any kind of dramatic acknowledgement. Just a slight inclination of his head that somehow conveyed more authority than most people could manage with a full speech. Colonel Briggs's posture snapped to perfect attention. Then he did something that made Amy audibly gasp and caused at least 6 people to drop their coffee cups. He saluted, a full, sharp regulation military salute held with absolute precision. The maintenance worker didn't return it. Instead, he made a small gesture with his left hand, 2 fingers pointed downward, palm relaxed. It lasted maybe half a second. The colonel immediately dropped his salute. The entire conference room had gone dead silent. Even the building's HVAC system seemed to be holding its breath. Evan felt like he was watching something that wasn't meant for civilian eyes. Some kind of military protocol that existed in a world he didn't understand. The facility director, red-faced and clearly out of his depth, stepped forward with the awkward energy of a man trying to regain control of a situation that had spiraled beyond his comprehension. "Colonel Briggs, this is just our maintenance contractor. He's been with the building for about 6 years, I think. Names—" He fumbled for a clipboard that wasn't there. "Well, his badge is pretty worn, but he does excellent work keeping the place running." Colonel Briggs didn't look at the director. His attention remained fixed on the maintenance worker. "I know exactly who he is." Amy, still holding the microphone like a lifeline, tried to inject some normalcy back into the proceedings. "Wait, you're being serious. He's actually someone important." The colonel turned toward her then, and his expression wasn't angry. It was something worse, controlled disappointment mixed with the kind of authority that could end careers with a phone call. "Important. This man conducted intelligence extractions behind enemy lines in Mogadishu while you were learning multiplication tables." A ripple of shock moved through the room like a seismic tremor. Amy's face went 3 shades paler. The microphone suddenly felt very heavy in her hands. Colonel Briggs turned back to the maintenance worker, his voice carrying the weight of shared history. "They told me you'd gone completely dark after Kabul, that you'd vanished into the contractor system." The maintenance worker finally spoke, his voice low and steady, like gravel being poured slowly from a bucket. "They needed a ghost." For the first time since entering the room, Colonel Briggs smiled. Not a grin, not a smirk, but the kind of smile that comes from respect earned under fire. "I based half my field training protocols on this man's operational reports," he announced to the room. "What you think of as standard security procedure. Ghost Viper 1 was writing those guidelines in chalk on cave walls before they were ever typed into official manuals." The facility director looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. Amy had backed away from the microphone entirely, but Colonel Briggs wasn't finished. His voice carried across the silent room like an after-action briefing. "He once held a communication relay position single-handedly for 19 hours in Iraq because the extraction team was compromised. Took a round through the thigh, had his dominant arm in a field sling, and still maintained radio contact to coordinate air support for a unit that was pinned down 2 valleys away." The room stared. Evan felt like his understanding of reality was being systematically dismantled and rebuilt. "That really happened?" someone whispered from near the back. Colonel Briggs caught the question and answered it for everyone to hear. "Yes." And he never received official recognition for it, because the operation was so far off the books that it didn't officially exist. He turned back to the maintenance worker with something approaching deference. "Sir, if I'd known you were here working under these conditions." "You weren't supposed to know," the man replied, his voice carrying the same steady calm. "That was the whole point." Colonel Briggs nodded slowly, processing the implications. "Does anyone else in the building know who you are?" The maintenance worker looked around the conference room, taking in the pale faces, the wide eyes, the sudden atmosphere of uncomfortable reverence. "They do now." The silence that followed wasn't awkward or embarrassing. It was heavy with the weight of realization, like the moment when you understand that everything you thought you knew was just the surface of something much deeper and more significant. Amy took another step backward, nearly colliding with the projector stand. Her eyes darted toward the facility director, but he wasn't offering any guidance. Nobody was talking except Colonel Briggs, and his attention remained focused entirely on the man they'd all been calling Radar for 6 years. The colonel walked slowly across the room, stopping exactly 1 pace away from the maintenance worker. There was no handshake, no embrace, no dramatic reunion, just 2 men acknowledging each other across a gap of rank and shared experience that nobody else in the room could fully comprehend. "I thought we'd lost you for good," Briggs said, quietly. "You did," the maintenance worker replied. I'm still lost, just cleaning floors now. And after this? After today? Same job, different day. Colonel Briggs exhaled softly, the sound of a man who understood more than he was saying. You always did have a talent for saying everything while explaining nothing. From somewhere near the bagel table, a voice cut through the quiet, too loud and too defensive. But I mean, he's just a janitor. Every head in the room turned. It was Jake Morrison, one of the junior analysts who'd been with the company for about 8 months. Fresh out of college, still wearing the kind of confidence that comes from never having been really tested. The same guy who'd laughed the loudest when Amy made her robot jokes. Colonel Briggs didn't move, but his voice dropped 10 degrees. You're looking at a man who once disabled an entire enemy weapons convoy in Helmand Province using a field toolkit, a mess hall spoon, and exactly 48 seconds before sunrise patrol. You think mopping floors is beneath his skill set? Jake shrank back like he'd been slapped. Briggs let the point settle, then turned to the facility director with the expression of someone who was about to make an administrative problem much more complicated. You have security clearance for this facility, correct? Yes, sir, Colonel. Level 3 authorized. Good. Then you'll appreciate what's in here. Briggs reached into his uniform jacket and withdrew a sealed folder, marked with enough official stamps to paper a small office. He held it up for everyone to see. This contains operational summaries for missions conducted between 1993 and 2006 under the direct command authority of the man you've listed in your personnel files as maintenance contractor. He handed the folder to the director, whose hands were visibly shaking as he accepted it. The cover was stamped in bold red letters, Classified Eyes Only Ghost Viper Operations. Amy had retreated to the far side of the room, trying to become invisible. Colonel Briggs addressed the entire conference room, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to briefing rooms full of people who carried weapons for a living. You people ever wonder why this building runs more efficiently than command posts I've visited in 3 different theaters of operation? Why equipment failures get resolved before they become critical problems? Why the same man has been on shift every single day for 6 years without requiring backup, supervision, or additional personnel? He gestured toward the maintenance worker who was quietly organizing tools on his cart. Because he never stopped serving. He just changed uniforms. The maintenance worker snapped a clasp shut on his toolkit and stood ready to leave, but Colonel Briggs wasn't finished with his impromptu briefing. To those of you who found his demeanor amusing, the colonel said, his gaze sweeping the room like a searchlight, understand something. Your careers, your security clearances, your comfortable positions in this building exist because men like him spent decades in places where making the wrong decision got people killed. Nobody moved. Nobody made eye contact. Briggs softened his voice slightly, making it more personal. This man trained my reconnaissance unit in advanced surveillance techniques in 1998. We didn't see him again for 3 years. Then he walked into our forward operating base in Fallujah in 2004, alone, carrying intelligence that prevented 200 American casualties. When I asked him what recognition he wanted for it, he said, nothing. Just keep the perimeter clean. The maintenance worker adjusted the angle of his cartwheels with the same precision he'd probably used to zero rifle scopes. Colonel Briggs looked at him one more time, his voice dropping to something that was almost private. You sure you don't want to come back in? Full reinstatement, your choice of assignment. No thank you, Colonel, the maintenance worker replied without hesitation. Not unless the lights go out again. Then we'll make sure they stay on. The maintenance worker nodded once and began pushing his cart toward the hallway. As he passed Amy, she opened her mouth as if to speak, maybe to apologize, maybe to ask questions, maybe just to say something that would make the situation feel less surreal. He held up one gloved hand, not harshly, not to silence her, but just enough to communicate. It's already handled. No need to make it more complicated. Then he was gone, the conference room door clicking shut behind him with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything else. The room didn't return to normal, because normal had been permanently redefined. You can't unknow something like that. You can't go back to making jokes about someone once you understand that the quiet man in the maintenance uniform has more operational experience than everyone else in the building combined. From that moment forward, nobody called him Radar anymore. The next morning felt different, like walking into a building you thought you knew, but discovering there were rooms you'd never noticed before. People still badged in at the security desk, still grabbed coffee from the same machines, still complained about the same parking situation. But there was a new quality to the silence. When the maintenance worker appeared in doorways, an acknowledgement that bordered on respect. Evan noticed it first, the way the security guard straightened slightly when the maintenance worker passed his station. How Sarah from accounting stood up when he entered the break room to replace a flickering fluorescent. Bulb, the subtle shift from dismissal to something that looked like deference. The maintenance worker never acknowledged any of it. Same faded jumpsuit, same methodical movements, same quiet efficiency as he adjusted thermostat settings and replaced air fresheners and realigned ceiling tiles that were maybe a quarter-inch off-center. But now people watched him work, and some of them found themselves wondering what kind of training teaches a man to clear a paper jam from the copy machine without ever taking his eyes off the hallway entrance. That weekend, Evan started asking questions through military contacts. The results were frustrating: no service record, just redacted documents and classified references. A retired major told him if he was really Ghost Viper 1, then he disappeared for the good of people who didn't even know he existed. The following Wednesday, Evan found him in the server room and brought coffee. Wasn't sure how you take it. Black's fine. I never thanked you for keeping this place running, and for everything else. Buildings are like people, he said. They collect things nobody else wants to deal with. I keep them clean, that's the job. But you used to do other things. I used to serve in different capacities. Now I serve in this capacity. The mission parameters changed, but the objective is the same. Evan hesitated, then asked the question that had been bothering him all week. Do you ever think about going back to something more? More what? The maintenance worker's grey eyes were calm, patient. More visible? More officially? Important, I guess, yeah. I left when circumstances required it, he said simply, and I stayed away because the situation continued to require it. Now the requirement has changed again. He gestured toward the humming servers, the blinking status lights, the steady flow of information that kept the building's operations running smoothly. The mission evolved, but people still need protection. Systems still need watching. Threats still need to be identified and neutralized before they become critical problems. Evans swallowed hard. Is that what you do here? Watch for threats? I maintain operational security. I observe patterns. I remember. There wasn't much to say after that. Evan turned to leave, but just before he stepped back into the hallway, he glanced over his shoulder. The maintenance worker had returned to his work, crouched beside another server rack, sleeves rolled up past his elbows. A small patch was visible on the inner seam of his uniform collar, faded embroidery, showing a wolf coiled around what looked like a combat knife, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. Evan didn't mention it, didn't point it out. He just nodded once and walked away, understanding that some stories don't need to be told out loud to be true. By the end of that month, the building had settled into a new equilibrium. Not in terms of policy or official procedure, but in the unspoken understanding that ran beneath the surface of daily operations. There were no announcements, no memorandums, no official acknowledgement of what had happened in the conference room. But somehow, everyone knew that you didn't dismiss the maintenance worker anymore. He didn't ask for respect, never demanded acknowledgement, but people offered it freely now, in small ways that would have seemed insignificant a month earlier. Staff members held doors open when they saw him approaching with his cart. The young woman from Human Resources offered to help carry a replacement water heater up 2 flights of stairs. He declined politely, but thanked her for the gesture. Even the overnight security guards had started nodding when he passed their stations. And Amy, she never made another joke over the public address system again. The following Friday, Colonel Briggs returned to the building. This time, he wasn't in full-dress uniform, but there was no mistaking his presence or authority. He spent an hour in closed-door meetings with the facility director and the security chief, and when those meetings concluded, he was carrying a sealed envelope. He walked directly to the maintenance area, where he found the maintenance worker adjusting a loose panel near the base of the main water cooler. "Sir," he said quietly. The maintenance worker stood and turned to face him. Colonel Briggs extended the envelope. Inside is a formal offer. Full reinstatement, security clearance renewal, assignment to any post you choose. Your rank, your benefits, everything retroactive. The maintenance worker accepted the envelope, looked at it for a moment, then handed it back unopened. "I appreciate the gesture, Colonel, but I already have access to every room that matters." Briggs let out a short breath that wasn't quite laughter, but conveyed deep respect. "You always did know how to say more in 10 words than most field commanders manage in a full briefing." He tucked the envelope back into his jacket pocket. "The offer stands. No expiration date." "I won't need it," the maintenance worker said calmly. "But you might." Briggs raised an eyebrow. "For what?" The maintenance worker picked up a voltage tester from his tool belt and held it for a moment, not as a threat, just as a reminder of the kind of work that happens in the background of every operation. "When something critical breaks," he said, quietly, "I'm already here." Colonel Briggs didn't ask for clarification. He gave a crisp nod of understanding and left. Later that week, Evan noticed something new mounted beside the door of the maintenance office. A small, official-looking placard, laminated and precisely centered. It read, "Access Restricted Facility, Integrity, Oversight." If you need to ask who runs this building, you're not cleared to know. Staff members whispered about it in the break rooms, but nobody questioned its authority, and nobody tried to remove it. One afternoon, as Amy was walking past the maintenance worker in the main corridor, she slowed her pace. He was changing a light bulb in one of the overhead fixtures, working with the same methodical precision he brought to every task. She stopped, hands folded, clearly struggling with something she needed to say. "Sir?" she asked finally. He looked down from the stepladder, waiting. She cleared her throat nervously. "I wanted to apologize for before. For the things I said. I didn't understand." He studied her face for a moment. Not unkindly, not with any trace of anger or resentment. Then he nodded once. "You were right about one thing, though." She blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I did miss a spot." And with that, he stepped down from the ladder, wheeled his cart around, and disappeared down the hallway with the same quiet efficiency that had defined his presence in the building for 6 years. Amy stood there for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. Then she walked away, understanding that she'd just been forgiven by someone who had no obligation to forgive her. From that day forward, she called him Mr. Hale, a name she'd never bothered to learn during the 6 years they'd worked in the same building. Evan watched all of these changes unfold over the following weeks. Subtle adjustments in behavior, quiet shifts in the building's social dynamics. No spotlight, no ceremony, no official recognition. But every time the maintenance worker entered a room, that room changed. The conversations became more respectful, the laughter less cynical, the overall atmosphere more professional, because now everyone understood that the most invisible man in the building was actually the one holding it all together. 3 weeks later, a new intern joined the facility. Fresh out of college, eager, ambitious, still carrying that particular kind of confidence that comes from never having been tested by real responsibility. He made the same mistake that others had made before him, looked at the maintenance worker, pushing his cart down the hallway, and asked, loud enough for several people to hear, "Who's the old guy with the mop?" No one answered immediately. The question hung in the air, like an alarm that nobody wanted to acknowledge, until a voice from the end of the corridor cut through the uncomfortable silence. It was Colonel Briggs. He'd returned that day for a quarterly security assessment, walking with a clipboard and flanked by 2 junior officers. He didn't break stride, didn't look up from his paperwork. He just spoke one word, clear and unmistakable: revenant. The entire hallway went quiet. Briggs continued walking, his boots echoing off the polished floor. The intern blinked rapidly, clearly trying to process what he'd just heard. Wait, did he just say revenant? Like, that was a call sign? Evany turned slowly to meet the intern's eyes, his expression serious. It was. The intern hesitated, sensing that he'd stumbled into something significant. Whose revenant? Evan looked down the hallway, where the maintenance worker's cart had already disappeared around the corner. Then back at the intern. Someone who's already been everywhere the rest of us are afraid to go, he said quietly, and came back carrying the people who couldn't make it out on their own. The intern didn't ask any more questions. That afternoon, the maintenance worker changed the batteries in the break room smoke detector. He wasn't saluted as he worked. No one made speeches. No flag was raised in his honor. But as he stood on the stepladder, arms overhead, Evan caught a glimpse of something tucked under his left sleeve just above the elbow. A patch, faded and partially torn, probably damaged years ago in some jungle or mountain range or desert that most people couldn't find on a map. One word was still visible, embroidered in thread that had once been black, but had faded to dark. Grey, revenant, and not a single person in that building doubted it anymore. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories often inspire the next video. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about the people who work quietly in the background of your daily life, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. These stories go up every day, and each one is designed to remind you that respect doesn't always wear a uniform. Share this with someone who needs to remember that the most important work often happens in the shadows, done by people who never ask for recognition. And speaking of stories that will change how you see the world, we've got more waiting for you right now. Click on the video that just appeared on your screen, and I'll see you tomorrow with another story that proves heroes don't always announce themselves. Until then, stay aware. You never know who's really watching out for you.